The skeletal remains of a prehistoric Paleo-Native American man dating back some 8,360 years were discovered on a bank of the Columbia River in Kennewick, which is located in the southeastern part of the state of Washington. These remains have been given the names Kennewick Man or Ancient One. Given his age and burial, he may have been a storyteller or wiseman of the tribe. In the frigid and desolate high desert, the location is approximately 300 miles from the mouth of the Columbia River. Due to the location's proximity to the place where the Snake and Columbia rivers meet, it is likely that this area served as an important water highway in times past. He may have been the first of a new group of peoples who came down from Alaska at this time and encountered another group that had already been there for thousands of years. The bones of the Kennewick Man's right hand, arm, and shoulder suggest that he was skilled at flint knapping and using an atlatl to throw spears. During the course of his life, Kennewick Man endured two significant injuries: a blunt force trauma to the chest that resulted in the breaking of 6 ribs, and an adversarial encounter in which he was speared. This is one of the oldest recorded evidences of a spear wound in the archaeological record. The spearpoint or atlatl dart that was embedded in his hip is by far the most interesting injury. He was extremely fortunate in that the spear, which had apparently been thrown from a considerable distance, narrowly missed the abdominal cavity, which would have resulted in a wound that would have been fatal. It came at him at an angle of 29 degrees pointing downward. Because the bone growth around the embedded point indicates he was between 15 and 20 years old when the injury occurred, and because he most likely would not have survived if he had been left alone, the researchers have come to the conclusion that Kennewick Man must have been with people who cared about him enough to feed and nurse him back to health. The spear or dart pierced the man's front while moving downward at an angle of 77 degrees. The findings of a previous investigation suggested that it may have come from behind. It was previously stated that the point was a cascade point, which is a type of point that is typical of the region. However, this is not the case. The points used by Cascade people typically have 2 pointed ends and may also have serrations, but the point embedded in the Kennewick Man only has 1 pointed end and a stem. A cascade point is a projectile point associated with the Cascade phase, an ancient culture of Native Americans that settled in the Pacific Northwest that existed from 9000 or 10,000 BC until about 5500 BC. The projectile found lodged in the hip of Kennewick Man was leaf-shaped, long, broad and had serrated edges, and has been identified as a Western stem tradition Hasket-type spearpoint. This type of spearpoint is older than the Cascade-type spearpoint, and is found in the Great Basin area, especially around Salt Lake in the region occupied by the Ute tribe. This may mean that he was attacked by another group, and he may have been part of this new Cascade people who settled in the area around this time. Today this land is the territory of the Nez Perce, who were known to be some of the most fierce fighters in the Northwest. The Great War Chief Joseph was one of the most revered Native American chiefs. Chief Joseph's life remains an iconic event in the history of the American Indian Wars. For his passionate, principled resistance to his tribe's forced removal. The Cascade Culture, aka the Old Cordilleran Culture, originated in Alaska, and migrated to occupy a wide area as far as Idaho and the plateaus of California, but they are generally not considered to be a maritime society. However, their spear points, or points resembling theirs, have been found as far south as Mexico and South America. The Cascade spearpoint was the typical artifact of these people, a simple, bifacial, leaf-shaped projectile point which average about 2.5 inches in length. These tools were used as spears or darts, or also knives, indicating the importance of hunting, although they also fished and gathered for subsistence. However, the main dependence was on land hunting, mostly of deer, bison, and other large mammals. The injury healed properly, and he no longer walked with a limp, as can be seen by the symmetrical attachments of his gluteal muscles after some time had passed. The circumstances surrounding that injury undoubtedly make for an interesting tale. It is possible that it was an accident, but it's also possible that it happened during a fight or battle. Indeed, this guy was one badass dude to be sure. It is likely that he lived among large game animals such as deer, pronghorn antelope, and bighorn sheep. However, salmon and marine mammals were his primary sources of nutrition. This diet, along with Kennewick Man's dependence on glacial meltwater in rivers, is consistent with the lifestyle of a traveler from the northern part of the continent who made his way down the Pacific coast to Washington state. Kennewick Man was also dependent on glacial meltwater in rivers for drinking water. The biography of the bones is referred to as osteobiography, which is a term that is utilized by anthropologists. The osteobiography of man tells the story of his eventful life. He stood about 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed around 160 pounds. He had a stocky build and was quite muscular. He had a right-hand dominance, and was approximately 40 years old when he passed away. Along the northwest coast of North America, where he hunted and fished, his wide-bodied frame helped him navigate the steppe-like habitat of his surroundings. Furthermore, researchers believe that Kennewick Man spent a significant amount of time holding something in front of him, while forcibly raising and lowering it. They theorize that he was throwing a spear downward into the water, similar to how seal hunters do it today. His leg bones give the impression that he frequently waded in shallow rapids, and he had bone growths that were consistent with surfer's ear, which is caused by frequent immersion in cold water. His leg bones also suggest that he frequently waded in shallow rapids. His knee joints give the impression that he spent a lot of time in a squatting position. In fact, he may have been a storyteller, captivating his audience with tales of far-flung travels and regaling them with tales of his own adventures. A severe blow to the chest suffered by Kennewick Man many years before his passing fractured 6 of his ribs. Because he threw spears with his right hand, 5 of the ribs that were broken on his right side never healed properly and became 1. Additionally, the researchers discovered 2 minor depression fractures on his cranium, one of which was located on his forehead, and the other was located further back. It is unknown what caused these dents to appear on approximately half of the ancient American skulls that have been discovered. They could have been thrown during fights that involved rock throwing, or they could have been injured in accidents that involved boulder spinning. This ancient weapon consisted of 2 or more stones connected by a cord, and thrown at birds while being whirled above the head in order to entangle them. If you do not swing a bowler in just the right way, the stones may come back at you and hit you. It's possible that a younger Kennewick Man learned how to throw a bowler the hard way when he was younger. Due to the fact that muscle attachments leave marks in the bones, anthropologists are able to determine which muscles were utilized the most by a person simply by examining the bones. The more stressed the muscle, the more prominent the mark. For instance, the right arm and shoulder of Kennewick Man appear to be very similar to those of a baseball pitcher. He spent a significant amount of time throwing something with his right hand while bending his right elbow. It was most likely a spear. When Kennewick Man was younger, he used to throw with such force that he fractured the glenoid rim, which is the socket of his shoulder joint. This is the kind of injury that takes a pitcher out of the game, and it would have made throwing extremely painful for him. His left leg was considerably more powerful than his right, which is typical of right-hand pitchers, who typically use their left leg to halt their forward momentum when pitching. His hands and forearms give the impression that he frequently pinched his fingers and thumb together while firmly gripping a small object. It is presumed that he napped his own spear points using this technique. Nearly 9,000 years ago, Kennewick Man was laid to rest next to a river by other people who carried out the burial. The question of whether Kennewick Man was buried by other people or was swept away in a flood, and encased in sediment has been the subject of debate among researchers. The researchers came to the conclusion that the man had been intentionally buried between 2 and 3 feet deep, with his body being placed in the grave with his head slightly higher than his feet and his hands placed at his sides. The location was on the bank of the river, with the head facing upstream and the body running parallel to the river. Interestingly, his DNA shows he was not Polynesian as had been speculated due to the shape of his skull, and he was not related to the Ainu of Japan. It turns out he was 100% Native American, and was most closely related to ancient people on the west coast of the Americas all the way down to South America.